For more than 1,000 years, the route to Santiago has been trodden by millions of feet. The most important holy route in Christianity attracted millions of Europeans in the Middle Ages and people from the world over in the late 20th century. Some of the pilgrims who follow the route are motivated by religion, while others set out in search of adventure. Pilgrims on the Camino de Santiago, on their way to visit the sepulchre of the Apostle, will find in hospitable burghers a plethora of Jacobean marks. The Gate of Santa Maria is one of the 12 gates in the medieval city walls. The Plaza del Rey San Fernando boasts the Cathedral of Santa Maria, which was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1984. Built on the location of the original Romanesque cathedral, the first stone was laid in 1221 by King Ferdinand III and Bishop Don Mauricio. The main facade has the Royal Gate, also known as the Gate of Pardon, which was refurbished in the 18th century, and a large rose window and gallery with 8 statues of the monarchs of Castile beneath the statue of St. Mary, and the inscription Pulchra es et Decora. On both sides are the 84-metre towers, crowned with splendid spires from the 15th century. The cathedral is the reputed burial place of St. James the Greater, one of the apostles of Jesus Christ, and is the destination of the Way of St. James, a major historical pilgrimage route since the Middle Ages. According to legend, the apostle St. James the Greater brought the message of Christ to the Celts in the Iberian Peninsula. According to the Codex Calixtinus, the architects were Bernard the Elder, Robertus Calperinus, and Esteban. The much larger Puerta del Sarmental is reached by climbing a long sweeping staircase, at the top of which is a sculpture of Jesus, with the apostles writing at their pulpits. The history of León is written on every one of its stones, reminding visitors that it was once part of an old kingdom and that it played a key role in the route of the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James. The city of León is the capital of León province in the autonomous community of Castile and León in northwest Spain. The city is home to an enviable collection of monuments that embraces almost all artistic styles, from Romanesque, Gothic, Plateresque, Renaissance and modern. The Convento of San Marcos is a convent hospital for pilgrims. It was used as a hospital for the pilgrims on the road to Santiago de Compostela. That's why some of the statues that appear on the Plateresque style facade of the convent and some medallions represent Jacobean motifs. One of Leon's glories is without a doubt the cathedral, one of the finest in Europe. Construction started in the 13th century, and it took 200 years to complete. Among its unusual features are its towers and steeples, where no attempt was made to make them match. It has more than 250 remarkable stained glass windows, including a large rose window. In total, there are over 1,800 square meters of glass. The Cathedral Museum is also worthy of a visit, with its wide array of exhibits. The Leon Cathedral, dedicated to Santa Maria della Regla, was declared of cultural interest in 1844. The pilgrim's route to Santiago, the objective of which was the saint's tomb in Santiago de Compostela, enabled cultural communication between all the towns of the Catholic world. The historic fact from which the town of Santiago was converted into a pilgrimage centre was the discovery of the tomb of St. James and his declaration as the patron saint of the kingdom in the 9th century. Today, the town has been converted into one of the most important monumental sites in the world. Its culture and monuments are of great value, and outstanding among them is the impressive cathedral with a Baroque facade, located in the Plaza de Obradoira. The vast area of this square, devoted to the cathedral building, is in fact made up of 3 easily distinguishable parts, namely a central section and 2 side ones. Built in Baroque style in the first half of the 18th century, this facade came to replace a formerly existing one and features elements to be assigned to various epochs. Standing around 70 meters high, the towers feature a 12th century Romanesque-style first level, disguised by more recent additions, to which the 2 remaining levels were added in the 17th and 18th centuries, in Baroque style. The highlights of the rich ornamentation gracing this facade are, from top to bottom, the effigy of St. James the Apostle, depicted in pilgrim's attire, and underneath the latter, a star-spangled chest symbolizing the saint's tomb. Thus, the flight of steps giving access to the cathedral was erected in the 17th century and leads to what is mistakenly referred to as the Old Cathedral, but which in reality is a 12th century vaulted Romanesque-style edifice, one which forms the true foundations of the cathedral at this point. Moving on from the Plaza dell'Obradoira, we reach this square by means of a passage, the Arco de Palacio. Plaza della Azabacheria, is so called in memory of the Guild of Jet Craftsmen of Azabacheros, whose workshops once lined both the square itself and the adjoining street of the same name. Plaza de la Azabacheria is flanked by three extraordinary buildings: the cathedral, whose northern facade gives onto the square, the Archbishop's Palace, and the monastery of San Martin Pinario. The Azabacheria facade was built in the second half of the 18th century, in a style marking the transition from the Baroque to the Neoclassical. The building, known as San Martin Pinario, was a Benedictine monastery from the time of its foundation in the 9th century until the advent of ecclesiastical disentailment in 1836, that forced members of religious orders to abandon their cloisters. At a later date, the edifice was reconverted to house the council seminary of the Santiago de Compostela Archdiocese, a function that it still serves today. Spreading out as it does, over an area of 20,000 square metres, the present-day building was erected in Baroque style from the 17th to the 18th century, thus replacing the former structure that stood on this site. The Plaza de la Quintana Square is reached along a winding lane, Transito de la Quintana, that skirts the cathedral from Plaza de la Azabacheria. Plaza de la Quintana is arranged into two levels, connected by an extremely wide flight of steps. The upper section is called Quintana de Vivos, Quintana of the Living, and the lower one, Quintana de Muertos, Quintana of the Dead. The eastern facade of the cathedral is also known as the Quintana facade. Constructed in Baroque style in the second half of the 17th century, in an attempt to give a more uniform appearance to the east end of the cathedral, which, aesthetically speaking, had suffered as a consequence of the many alterations carried out on this part of the building between the 12th and 17th century. On contemplating this facade, the attention of the observer is drawn by its two magnificent portals. The one situated nearest the flight of steps leading up from the square is closed off by an iron grille and is adorned by 27 sculptures. This doorway leads through to a small courtyard, at the far side of which stands the world-renowned Puerta Santa, or Holy Door. Plaza de las Platerías, Silversmith Square, is lined on two of its sides by the cathedral, and is flanked on the other two by the Chapter House and the Bank of Spain, the latter dating from the middle of the last century. As we enter Santiago Cathedral, we become aware of the original structure of the edifice. the exterior of which has undergone many alterations and has been extensively added to in the course of time. The original cathedral church, built from 1075 to 1188 in pure Romanesque style, has a Latin cross ground plan. Lying at the centre of the top arm of the Latin cross, the high chapel was covered in gilt wood and ornamental stones during the Baroque period, in the second half of the 17th century. The high altar, lined with sheets of engraved silver, is presided over, as is its side grille work, by a 13th century Gothic polychrome stone sculpture of St. James the Apostle. Covering the whole of the high chapel is a solid, sumptuous gilt wood baldachin, supported by a series of massive angels. Regarded as a veritable masterpiece of Romanesque sculpture, this doorway was built by Master Matteo in the period spanning the years 1166 and 1188. Having been designed to serve as a porticoed entrance to the cathedral, it comprises 3 arches, a central one and 2 side ones, that correspond to the central nave and aisles. Dominating the central arch tympanum is the figure of Christ, surrounded by the 4 evangelists. Appearing on either side of the latter is a group of figures in prayer, representing the people of God, beneath which there are 8 angels, carrying the instruments of the Passion. The part of the cathedral, lying to the right of the Obradoiro facade, belongs to the cloister itself, built in the 16th century in Plateresque style, and featuring an impressive gallery on its upper level, and a strange tower with a tiered roof, reminiscent of a dovecote, at the southwestern corner of the building. The late Gothic cloisters are well worth a look, particularly for their view of the cathedral exterior, crawling with pagodas, corns, domes, obelisks, battlements, scallop shells and cornucopias. The old church of San Martino was founded in the 12th century and the current one dates from the 17th century. The church has an impressive plateresque facade from the late 16th century. The central part, between the door and the oculus, is dominated by the Virgin, St. Benedict and St. Bernard, while the pediment crowning the front depicts St. Martin sharing his cape with a pauper. Occupying 3 floors, this museum is a tribute to the Apostle St. James the Greater and the pilgrims who come to visit his relics. The museum highlights the importance of popular devotion to St. James and the development of the pilgrimage routes to his tomb, starting in the late Middle Ages, especially in Europe. It consists of 8 rooms, in which, through images, objects and documents, the origins of the cult of St. James are explained to the visitor. The convent of San Francisco de Val de Dios was founded by St. Francis of Assisi during his visit to Santiago de Compostela in 1214 at the place called Val de Dios. The land was purchased from the monks of San Marino for the symbolic annual rent of a basket of trout. The foundation, shrouded in legend, is described by an inscription on the wall of the present-day convent, according to which St. Francis commissioned a coalman called Cotole to build it. This he was able to do thanks to the miraculous discovery of a treasure. Every day of the week, there are cultural events and places open to go out in Santiago. It's common to start going out for some tapas at 8 or 9 in the evening. There are plenty of places in the new part of town, but it's the bars and taverns of the old town that are the real specialists. Visit the squares around the cathedral, where you can see improvised performances by artists, musicians, and of course La Tuna, traditional university serenading bands, who can usually be found there. Its old town is hard to beat. The historic centre is set around the cathedral. This part of the city has the UNESCO World Heritage designation